So recently we've been using these webinars to take a deep dive into various modules of the Livestock Production Assurance Program. Last week we focused on animal welfare and then on livestock movements. This evening we're going to wrap up this series with a look at audits and accounts. LPA audits are a critical part of the program and they're necessary for verifying the on-farm practices meet the required standards set out in the LPA and underpin the credibility of Australia's red meat industry. For producers, understanding how audits work, including remote audits, preparation and proper record keeping can reduce stress, minimise disruption to your businesses, and help avoid non-conformities. This webinar is going to step through the full process, including how to prepare for the audit effectively and manage corrective action requests or CARs, so you can approach audits with confidence and without undue stress. Now I'll start by introducing the ISC team. Your presenters for this evening are going to be Elizabeth Bradley, ISC's Manager of Policy Quality, and Trish Ryder. Trish is a Senior Auditor and Manager with AusMeat, who conduct LPA audits for ISC. In the background, we also have several members of the ISC team. You know some of them. We have Natasha Petty, the Group Manager of ISC Operations, Xander Bennett from the Communications team, and Quality and Compliance Officer Kaylin Pure with us. The team are going to be busy in the background answering your questions. Thank you to those who've already submitted some prior to registration. For everyone else, if you want to submit a question tonight, please use the Q&A box to ask a question. To find that, if you move your cursor to the bottom of your screen on a computer, you'll see that there is a Q&A button, or it may be on the top if you're using an iPad or another tablet device. Click and tap on that and type your questions in. Just a reminder, we're looking for questions, not statements, something that everyone can get the benefit out and that we can answer. If we can't answer your question tonight, don't worry, we'll answer it offline and include it in the Q&A transcript, which we'll circulate later this week. This session is being recorded, so we're also going to circulate a link to a video along with that package and any other related resources that might be of help for you. Now, with that said, I'm going to hand over to Elizabeth and she's going to start you off with the first session tonight. So please enjoy your evening.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jack. Hi, everybody. Glad you could all join us. So tonight we're going to be running through the audits that we do under the Livestock Production Assurance Program. So we'll go through what's involved, a little bit about the audit process, some different audit types, including remote audits, how you prepare best for doing an audit, and then what happens after the audit if there are any issues found and how that all works together. So Trish and I will walk you through the different requirements as well in terms of what auditors come to check and what kind of records and things they're going to be asking for and conversations they might be having as well. At the end of the audit kind of segment, we're also going to run through some additional features and things that you can do in your LPA account online, including some voluntary modules that we've implemented recently around harvested rangeland goats, if you capture those types of goats, and if you're a cattle producer or a dairy producer around the EU Deforestation Regulation and some dairy quality assurance updates. So we've got a full agenda, but we'll get right into it in terms of talking about audits. So our Livestock Production Assurance Program, or LPA as the acronym we use, you'll hear us use that throughout the evening, is our on-farm assurance program in Australia. So it covers everyone nationally, and it all does assurance around animal welfare, food safety, in particular when those animals get turned into meat, and then on-farm biosecurity as well. It also really supports tracing animals in linkaging to the National Livestock Identification System, or the NLIS. And it also provides you access to the national vendor declarations, which is what you fill out when you're moving those livestock through the value chain. So it's a very important program, and it's the cornerstone that underpins all of our sort of market access in our production sector. So if you're wanting to kind of sell and market livestock into processors, especially those ones that are exporting beef or sheep meat or goat meat, LPA is your prerequisite to access those processors. Now, LPA is important because, as I said, it underpins that market access we have. Market access is, getting our products overseas to overseas countries and getting you money in your pocket. So $74.5 billion industry. It's a massive industry and it keeps everyone in business. So it's really helping supply that assurance that our customers are asking for in terms of those food safety and animal welfare requirements. Also, we're looking at it in terms of risk mitigation. So making sure you've got strong biosecurity practices on your property reduces your risk of, diseases and strengthening all of those protections that you have on your property as well. At the end of the day, we are trying to produce a quality and safe product in terms of the meat that goes onto people's plates and they're eating. So food safety is a really paramount important aspect of LPA as well. We also do have animal welfare looped into livestock production assurance because welfare is so tied into everything else we do, and caring for your animals is just good sense. We have done lots of work in the last sort of few years in terms of fortifying the program and expanding it and making it easier to interact with the program itself, in terms of improving education and our accreditation process as well. So if you've been through that recently, you'll have seen it's a different set out and a lot of questions to try and help guide those sorts of improvements. Now, the LPA program itself has program rules which tell us how the program works and sort of how audits happen and all that sort of operational stuff. Then we move into the other side, which is what all the livestock producers that sign up for LPA have to agree to implement on their property and those requirements they have to meet. So we have 7 modules or kind of elements that we talk about in terms of the actual requirements of the program, and they're up on screen at the moment. So Trish and I will run you through sort of what each requirement means and then how to meet those requirements when you or if you get selected for an audit. So the property risk assessments, safe and responsible animal treatments, stock foods, so basically what you're feeding animals, preparation for dispatch, so your fit to load requirements, your livestock transactions and movements, which is around your NLIS obligations and your NVD completion, your biosecurity plan and your animal welfare requirements. In terms of the additional voluntary requirements that I'll run through at the end, so I mentioned them at the start, but harvested rangeland goats, the European Union's Deforestation Regulation tool, and then also the linkage between dairy quality assurance if that's relevant to you. We're still expanding the program, so I would expect to see a lot more in that space in the coming few years, I think. But onto the main topic of LPA audit. So Jack mentioned this in his intro as to why we have audits, and it's really around providing that assurance to our customers, both domestically and internationally. So it's part of the food safety system we have in Australia, and it really helps fortify export certification that we have to do to get the product into other countries. Also, audits help in our educational tool. So it is a quality assurance program, and that means you get an option to continually improve, and there's always an opportunity to correct and come back in and rectify. So it's always about improvement and helping everyone involved in the program meet their requirements as well. In terms of the actual audit program, so we have over 170,000 producers in the LPA program, and we do not audit everyone every year, even every 3 years. We only audit 4,000 producers every year under the program ISC runs. And that's a sample that's made up of random and targeted audits. So the targeted audits we target based on risk. So if you're keeping your NLIS up to date and you're doing your NVDs correctly, it's less likely you'll get targeted for an audit. And random audits are picked, as we say, at random to kind of make sure we keep the travel costs low around those targeted audits. So we do 4,000 a year. There's a mix between random and targeted. And Trish will talk soon about the remote audits, but we can do them remotely where we don't actually come to the property and we do a different process, or we come and have a visit on the farm. AusMeat do perform the audits for ISC, so they're their audit provider, and they've got lots of trained and experienced auditors that come and visit you and arrange that process, which is why Trish is here tonight to talk about some of that process. There are other types of audits that happen under the program, specifically for the National Residue Survey, which is a department of the federal government, and they do that in terms of investigating residue issues and things like that and using chemicals. But we're not talking about those ones tonight. We're just talking about the general LPA program and what that means for everyone. So I'm going to hand to Trish, who's going to run you through a little bit about the audit process, remote audits, and then how to prepare for audit. So Trish, over to you.
So thanks, Elizabeth, and welcome everybody. Yes, so I'm Trish from Ozmeat, and I'm happy to be here tonight to go through this process with all our LPA producers out there. So what is involved in the audit? So the audit process is pretty straightforward. Okay, so if you are selected for an audit, you will receive a notification from ISC with an audit checklist that can help you to prepare for the audit. The notification will come to you either via email or a letter, depending on the communication method you have listed with your LPA in your LPA portal. The letter will explain the steps and whether or not it's a random audit or a ISC targeted audit, an NRS audit, or it may also detail whether or not it's a remote audit. If you are selected for a remote audit, it's important to know that you can ask for that audit to be conducted on farm if that's what you want, and vice versa. So if you get selected for a random and you would prefer a remote audit, we can accommodate that process. It's also important to note that if you are selected for a ISC targeted audit, that it may be that an on-farm audit needs to be done rather than a remote, but it's, let's say, negotiable. Following the notification, so when you receive your notification, you will be contacted by an auditor from Ozmeat. We have a pool of auditors. I'm going to say a pool of 52 available auditors, and not all those auditors are Ozmeat staff. They can be contractors that will contact you, but effectively they all work for Ozmeat. So they'll contact you to schedule a suitable time and date for the audit to occur. The audit itself could probably take up to 2 to 4 hours on average. It just depends on the size of the operation, I guess, and actually how well you're prepared and what records are available at the audit. At the start of the audit, we would generally run through like an entry meeting at the start of the audit, talk about what's going to happen, what we'll need to see as part of the audit, and where we might want to go and visit on the property. So the auditor will give you a rundown on how things are going to go at what we call the entry meeting. So during the audit process, the auditor will check the records and how they're maintained and how food safety, biosecurity, and animal welfare is being carried out. The auditor may ask your staff some questions, if there's staff available, and conduct an inspection of the livestock and the property facilities as part of the farm. Sometimes if there's areas on the farm that have been identified as being contaminated with persistent chemicals, the auditor may also want to go and visit that at-risk site just to see how the risk is being mitigated in that area. At the end of the audit, the auditor will conduct what we call a closing meeting or an exit meeting, and they'll notify you of any non-conformities that may have been noted during the audit process. And any required actions as a result of those non-conformances or CARs, corrective action requests. You'll receive a copy of the audit report that the auditor uses, the checklist that the auditor uses. You'll receive a full copy of that audit report and a copy of any non-conformances or corrective action requests post the audit. And that should come to you within a couple of days of the audit occurring. It's important to note that there's no charge. Okay, there's no charge for the LPA audit itself. It's actually covered by the LPA program. However, should the first audit reveal a critical non-conformance, so critical non-conformance is a non-conformance that's fairly important. Thinking about that, any subsequent audits that may be required as a result of that critical non-conformance, there could be a charge for that audit to occur. It's also important to note that the auditor is not able to provide any specific advice on how to comply, but in reality, we're there to educate through the process, provide some guidance as to where you can obtain some advice or information when it comes to completing the audit process. Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, so we talked a little bit earlier there about the remote audits. So the remote audits, as Elizabeth mentioned, are part of the LPA audit process. So the producer may be selected for a remote audit, and this is dependent on whether they've nominated their willingness to complete a remote audit within their LPA portal. So if the producer is selected for a remote audit, they'll receive that audit notification email, the same as any other producer, as we talked about already, and it'll provide guidance for you to how to upload your documents and evidence onto your LPA account so that the auditor can see that information within the audit portal, the LPA portal. Once you've done that, the auditor will contact you. The auditor will contact you to arrange an audit date or a meeting to discuss the audit outcome. So once the documents have been uploaded into your portal, the auditor will review those documents, and then they'll put that call into you and maybe just ask a few questions around a few areas of documentation that they've reviewed, and then provide you with an exit meeting outlining, again, if there are any non-conformances as a result of that review of documentation. The auditor will go through that process with you as well. It's also important to note there that the remote audit does not include a farm visit, and that there are approximately 900 remote audits that are completed annually. But like I said earlier in the earlier slide, and that is, if you would prefer a remote audit, we're more than happy to accommodate that process, or again, if you prefer a on-farm audit, we can switch those audit categories over. So next slide, please, Elizabeth. Okay, so the fun part, preparing for an audit. So to prepare for an audit, producers should review their on-farm practices against the audit checklist that's actually included within that LPA audit notification, just to ensure that their operation is up to date. This will help identify any areas that may need attention before the audit, ensuring that the process is as smooth as possible. That's the key. We want the audit process to be a good experience for the producers out there. So looking at that, farm records will be reviewed by the auditor, so it's important to make sure that they are accurate and up to date. It's important to be familiar with the 7 LPA requirements and what you should do to ensure your business is operating under the LPA rules and standards. We are going to go through each of the requirements in more detail now, and some common non-conformances. So as the farm records will be reviewed by an auditor, one of the things that I like to say is very important, and it would help a lot of producers, and that is the resource called the LPA record keeping book, or templates online via the ISC website. Now, with the LPA record keeping booklet, you can actually buy one of those LPA record keeping booklets through your LPA account, or if you don't choose to buy one, you can download the information off the ISC website. So that's a free process to do that. Record keeping has to suit your operation, okay? So if you prefer the LPA record keeping booklet, which I think is a great resource for all producers out there, because it covers off on every LPA component. So if you're using that as your guide, you're meeting the minimum requirements. But it doesn't matter. You can have a mix of what it takes, right? So if you have the book, you can have it on your computer, you can have it fully paper or online using the apps. There's a number of apps out there. All that is adequate, right? You just need to have records that's going to suit your business and meet the minimum standards of LPA. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Trish. Some great plugs there for our resources, and I concur. They are very helpful if you're not sure where to start. So we can dive into the content in terms of what we're actually going to be looking at, or auditors look at when they come to visit or start this audit process. So the first one is the property risk assessment, and that's all around looking at your property and identifying anything that could contaminate your livestock. Risk assessments aren't as scary as they sound. It's literally just having a think about what's around and could that contaminate livestock? And if you think it could, you could write it down in a table, and then how you're going to restrict or manage that access. Some key things we like to see, or auditors would like to see, and as a minimum kind of requirement, is to have a property risk assessment completed. Again, we have a template for that. And a farm map highlighting any risk areas you might have identified through that process is also important to have. Auditors will also be asking around if you did have accidental contamination on the property of your livestock, how you would identify those livestock. So it could be as simple as an ear tag, a note in your diary or your little pocketbook or whatever it might be, but some way to explain how you'd identify that and then make sure that you're communicating that on NVDs. Did pop up on the slide there some other things that you can have. They're not mandatory, but there are some things that you could do if you do have those persistent chemicals or, history of contamination on the property. So property residue status reports from your state government or soil and animal fat tissue results. Again, they're not mandatory. They're just things that you could have if that's applicable to you. And the key thing for cattle producers, if you're using recycled water from a wastewater treatment plant, so generally from somewhere like a local government, you need to make sure that you've got adequate information about the treatment level of that water, so you can be informed about the risk of beef measles and like tapeworm eggs and things in the water. It doesn't really happen a lot in Australia, but we have that risk framework there for a reason. So Trish, let us know, what is the most common nonconformity we find around property risk assessments in LPA?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So the most common nonconformance in that area there is actually not having a risk assessment at all. So not documenting that risk assessment. The other part to that is the actual mitigation of those risks that may have been identified. So if they've done a partial risk assessment, but they haven't actually put the mitigations in. So risks are not being controlled on farms, such as animal access to old buildings or treated power poles, old vehicles, dumps, food scraps, and old dip sites there. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Absolutely. It's a very common nonconformity, and it takes not very long to complete. It's very simple. We always like to start with a property map where you can identify any risk areas. This is just a mock-up one, depending. Again, it can be any format you like. You can Google map it and draw on it, whatever you like to do. Just kind of helps identify those risk spots first, and then sort of we understand sort of the layout of the property. Having that done first, then you can move into, like I said, the simple table approach in terms of the risk assessment. Again, this is a free template. It's in the record keeping book, but we sort of want to go through what the risk site or source of that contamination is that you've identified, and then sort of how you're going to minimize livestock having access to that risk action. So a common one we see is, really old dip sites that used to be used in the 80s, 70s, 90s around that, dieldrin dipping, all that really old stuff we don't use anymore, and just fencing it off or burying it, or simple things like that, so that livestock can't go over and graze it, because if they're consuming that feed, they can get heavy metal buildup and contamination that we don't want in our red meat as well. So you can table it and have it ready. It doesn't take very long. You sort of have to take 5 to 10, 15 minutes, depending on how big your property is, to have a think about it and run through that process. So it's not super complicated, and don't shy away from it. And if you do need help, you can always call us up and we can help you through it. So property risk assessment's the first one. So the next one is around animal treatments, or giving, animal treatments to livestock on the property. And we want to make sure that we're doing so, we're giving, a good treatment to the animals, and it's the treatment's doing what it needs to do and it's not going to hurt them. But also that we're not going to end up with chemical residues in the meat once they go to processing. And that's a risk to our market access, and unfortunately does happen from time to time around, chemical residues and things in meat. So we want to avoid that. And the key things around the LPA requirements is how you store, use, and dispose of chemicals. So making sure you're, not having expired products on the property, you're following your labels, it's stored away from livestock. They're the key requirements, pretty common sense. Other bits and pieces are around making sure people giving the treatments are trained, keeping really good records around your animal treatments, and if you do have animals that are that you've purchased and they were in a withhold period or an interval around a treatment, to be aware of those before you can sign them. If you're using drugs or veterinary products off label, important to get veterinary advice and keep that on hand as well, because that is a legal requirement as well in states and territories. But that's sort of the requirements to have ready. So that could be part of the inspection the audit actually goes to do on the property to look at the chemical storage, but also the treatment records and anything else in relation to that. But I'm sure Trish is going to line us up nicely around what the most common issue we see around this element at our audits is.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth, again. Yeah, so the most common non-conformity around this element or module is the fact that some producers don't actually keep records of their livestock treatments, or they may be incomplete. So when we talk about being incomplete, it could be things like missing the batch number or the expiry date of the product, the withhold period that may not be recorded. And the important one also there is the ESI. So just remembering that when you're looking at your products that you're using, that you're also taking into consideration the ESI is being recorded, because sometimes not knowing where our animals will end up, the withhold period and the ESI can be significantly different in days. So just making sure that you record those bits of information. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yes. And your ESI is what we call an export slaughter interval, and it applies when an overseas customer or country has a longer period of time between administering that drug to when it's safe for slaughter and human consumption, whereas the withhold period is what we use in Australia against our standards. So they can vary based on what customers in overseas countries require for their food safety requirements. So it's important to pay attention to both of them. Again, we've got a record template that you can use if you don't have one, or you're unsure about what data or information you actually need to capture around these treatments. So, treatment date, the livestock description, how many you treated, the product name, the batch numbers, the dose that you gave, and then those withhold periods and export slaughter intervals are really important. And you need that information to complete your national vendor declaration if you're going to go consign those animals later. And we do have recent experiences where people have, not kept that record on their animal treatment records and consigned them to an export slaughter abattoir, and we've had to, alert everyone to hold the boxes, and it causes a lot of stress. So if you're clear about your records and you've got those to then go and fill out your NBDs, you're protecting not only yourself but the entire industry in terms of maintaining access. So, not too different from animal treatments is the next requirement around stock foods, any pasture treatments or any chemical use you're using on the property. So in terms of this, it's very similar. We want to make sure we're not, feeding animals something that's going to make them sick, but also if we are using chemicals on pasture or incoming feed or feed that you've grown on the property, that it's not contaminated unacceptably with chemicals and then leaving residues in the meat as well. So with this storage of chemicals, similar, away from livestock, make sure there's nothing expired. If you're using, especially the heavy hitting chemicals like the class 3 ones, chemical user training is important. It's good to do even if you're not, and just so you're aware of how to do it properly and safely for your own personal safety. If you're buying in any feed, so hay, fodder, grain, whatever it might be, the best practice is to get a commodity vendor declaration from the person you're getting it from. If you can't get that, it's always good to do a little risk assessment on the supplier, maybe keep a little sample of it safe so it's not going to make them sick. Or you can apply a 60-day hold period on the livestock after you feed it, just so you're clear of that time frame. About 60 days is probably safe in terms of any withhold periods applying. Also being able to explain how you identify where you've sprayed any chemicals, and keeping records of chemical application is also really important. The other plug is around restricted animal materials. So things like meat meals or, your household's kitchen scraps, especially meats or poultry food, dog food, anything that's meat, containing meat. We don't want livestock to have access to that, especially ruminants. It can make them sick and cause mad cow disease. So we want to avoid that also at all costs. So just keeping that away from them so they can't have access to it as well. So they're the key things around what auditors will be looking at in terms of those requirements. And Trish, what do we find most at audits around this requirement that's common?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So for this particular module, we're looking at non-conformances in relation to no commodity vendor declarations being available when requested. So for introduced feed or purchase feeds, no commodity vendor dec. And I'll also add to that, and that can be records of spraying as well. So just falling short on records of spraying of pastures and crops, etc., and how those sprays are mitigated to ensure livestock can't access those areas. So yes, so commodity vendor declarations, lack of, and also spray records. So lack of spray records at times there, Elizabeth.
Yes, and I think you know it's coming, but we do have records around these as well to help you out. You can get the commodity vendor declaration online. We have ones around, if you're treating hay that you've got on the property, or you've got something in silos, for example, or you're treating your pasture. We've got records to kind of support you doing all that. But again, whatever suits your system in terms of that. Could be an invoice with some notes made on it. It can be as simple as, taking a picture of a product label. It's got to suit your system, but we do have resources available to help us, of course. Okay, so now that's stock foods, we can talk around preparing livestock for transport or fit to load requirements, that dispatch step. So this one's around making sure your livestock are fit for transport, that they're not contaminated beforehand and on the journey, and also that, you're minimising that stress of that preparation and then transport in itself. So this one's a little bit hard to audit, I have to say, because we're not usually there when you're loading your livestock. But we can look at things like your ramps, your yards, make sure they're in good condition so that, as you assemble your livestock, that they're going to be, loading safely. Being able to explain what fit to load means. So what are you looking for in terms of the animal's disease status, and can it walk, is it blind, all those sorts of things in terms of making the journey. The MLA fit to load guide's a really great tool if you're unsure about any of that to have available, so you can quickly reference it if you're unsure. Keeping records as well of your transporter information, NVDs, or any complaints, etc., that you might get around your transport as well is also important, so you can improve for next time. But Trish, most common non-conformance we find around preparing livestock for dispatch?
Yeah, so this one, Elizabeth, as you mentioned before, it's hard to audit in the sense that we don't get to see a lot of husbandry practices happening in the yards when we're there. So from an inspection point of view and objective evidence point of view, probably the loading ramps, the odd loading ramp not being, in the best condition. But yes, you got to work with what you've got, and we appreciate that. But this is probably the element that most producers are compliant with, because at the end of the day, they want their beautiful animals to get on that truck and be healthy and happy when they get on that truck to get them transported to their final destination.
Absolutely. So it's a good one to be aware of. And again, the Fit to Load guide's a really helpful use. MLA also has a transport hub, which talks around time of feed and water, class condition transports of specific types of livestock. And LPA also talks around the bobby calves. So if you do have bobby calves that are transported between 5 and 30 days old without their mother, there's specific requirements that you need to meet, which comes under this section as well, around making sure they've had milk and they're warm enough and things like that. So it's an important one to note, but maybe not applicable to everyone. And speaking of NVDs, we can now move into livestock transactions and movements, which is around communication. It's about communicating our food safety status of our animals and beginning that traceability journey from property to property through the supply chain. So things that the auditor will be looking at is your NLAS database. They'll run a report to see all your transfers and make sure that you've got no systems transfers or errors or things on there that indicate that you haven't transferred something correctly. They'll check to see that you have NLAS identification devices for your livestock. An important one is around making sure if you're introducing a lot of livestock, so you're buying in livestock, you've got access to post-breeder tags as well. So they're orange for cattle and pink for sheep and goats, to make sure that if they lose their original tag, you can replace them, and that's meeting the rules. And then your NVD. So making sure that if you're buying in livestock, you're getting a copy of that NVD and you're looking at it to make sure you understand what you've just received. And then if you're consigning your livestock, that you're filling it out correctly and answering all those questions based on all those good records that you've been keeping around treatments and feed. But Trish, what will we find at audit? What's the most common non-conformity?
Yeah, so common non-conformances there in this area is about the NVDs, so incomplete NVDs, sometimes no NVDs, and I think that's important to actually ensure that you do get that NVD and you review that NVD when you have livestock come onto your property, particularly I'll throw this out as a scenario, particularly if you're producing HGP-free animals. If you're purchasing HGP-free animals, or you believe them to be HGP-free, and you never reviewed the incoming NVD, and there's a HGP animal on that consignment, you run the risk of then filling out an incorrect NVD when those animals dispatch from the property. So it's important to review the incoming NVD so that you can then back up what you're saying when you complete your NVD on the way out. The other big non-conformity in this space is actually transfers on the database there, Elizabeth. So we get a lot of systems transfers, and systems transfers only happen because the animals or the device was not registered to the PIC in the first place when it was dispatched. So look, just thinking about that, if we're buying livestock off property down the road, it's your responsibility to do that transfer onto the database. Just remembering, if you're buying livestock off a virtual selling platform, that again, it is your responsibility to do that transfer onto the database. Please don't assume that somebody's done it for you. Please check whenever you're purchasing livestock, please check your database to ensure that the animals have been transferred onto your database, because that is a very big non-conformance in the LPA space. And at the end of the day, Elizabeth, if I can just say this, if you've gone to all that trouble as a producer to buy these beautiful animals and feed them on your property, but not do the transfer, you're selling yourself short in that animal being eligible for whether it be a domestic program or an international program where it requires that animal to have lifetime traceability. You're selling yourself short, and your animal and yourself are missing out on that revenue. Not so
Definitely. Much. Yes, lifetime traceability gives you more market options, so you can potentially get more money for your animals. And it is an important point to drive home. So making sure you record those movements on the database within 2 days of their arrival is the regulatory requirement that the state government set. So that you can actually, there's legal responsibilities around that over and above LPA. And then also your NVDs and identifying your livestock correctly. So they're all regulatory requirements, actually. They're all written into state legislation to ensure that it happens, because it's really important for biosecurity and being able to rapidly trace livestock if we do have food safety issues or disease outbreaks, which we really don't want, but it's there in case we need it. Now, speaking of biosecurity and disease outbreaks, we can move on to biosecurity on your property. So there's a simple thing to have ready for your auditor, and the audit is a copy of your farm biosecurity plan. So that it's a document. Again, we've got templates. I'll show you those very shortly. There's some other things you can have, like your biosecurity sign on your fence, a visitor log if that's applicable to your business and you've got lots of visitors coming and going. If you're buying livestock in, you can get animal health decks as well, which kind of helps fortify your information that you're getting around their status. Understanding, what to look for, your monitoring activities, disease prevention programs, all of those things that you're doing on your property and how that relates to your biosecurity. So it's about fortifying your boundary fence and making sure that diseases and pests and weeds and things are less likely to come on board and establish themselves to the best of your ability and what's reasonably practical. We know, wild pests and things are sometimes uncontrollable and it's just not possible. So it's what's reasonable and what's actually possible for you as well. So, it's pretty common. Trish, what's the most common non-conformity around biosecurity plans?
Yes, Elizabeth. So the most common non-conformance in this area, of course, is the fact that there is no farm biosecurity plan available.
Yes, and up on screen is just the first page of our biosecurity plan that we have. We've got the Word version. You can download it, write on it. You can also complete one online. There's an online tool that will walk you through all the questions. I will just flag that the biosecurity plan is becoming part of the LPA accreditation process. So that'll start from the 1st of September this year as well. So if you haven't updated one or uploaded one to your LPA account, I suggest you jump on and do that so you don't have to do it when you accredit next. But it is becoming mandatory because we want to make sure that we're doing this really well and that everyone has a biosecurity plan to protect themselves and the rest of industry as well. So it's a good flag and a note for everyone. And lastly, we can talk about animal welfare. So animal welfare in LPA is all around how we're meeting the Australian animal welfare standards. So realistically, it's not duplicating the Australian standards, it's referencing them and looking at how we're meeting those standards within the program. So the things the auditor will ask for is proof that you've got access to those animal welfare standards. They're free to download. We've linked them on our website. They're accessible. You can have them bookmark, print them, whatever you like to do. Also, to have training in the animal welfare standards and guidelines, we have a free course available through LPA that both managers need to do, and then any staff that do husbandry activities should do, or you can train them yourself in those standards, but it's an easy way to meet those requirements. If you don't have any staff, obviously you don't need to train them. And the new requirement in the program is to have an animal welfare management plan. This only became a requirement as of the 1st of September last year. So it is checked at audits. It's in the audit notification letter to make sure you have it and have it documented. So we have an online tool that'll walk you through the questions. It's part and parcel of accreditation. So as you go through accreditation next time, you'll actually have to complete it if you haven't done so already. It doesn't take very long, maybe 10 to 15 minutes, depending on your practices. It's an easy tool. You select kind of what husbandry activities you do and what livestock, based on what livestock species you have, so you're not answering questions that aren't relevant to you. You get a document at the end of it and you can review it if things change. So it's there for you. And being a relatively new requirement, we've only been auditing since September on this. There's only really one car around the animal welfare management plan. But Trish, any other insights into animal welfare non-conformances?
Yeah, so yes, you hit the nail on the head there, Elizabeth. So having no animal welfare management plan. And if I can also say at times, no evidence of completing the animal welfare training on the e-learning platform from their portal.
And if you do need a guide, we have how-to guides on how to complete it. Then we have an offline version if you're really stuck and can't use them digitally. And that's kind of the end of what's needed for what the audit is going to be checking for. But if something doesn't match up, so there's something missing during the audit, Trish, can you just explain about corrective action requests or CARs and sort of what they all mean and the different levels?
Yeah, sure. So when you look at our screen in front of us here, we've got three corrective actions. So one would be an observation. So we call that an observation. That's an opportunity for improvement. It just means that you've got the systems in place, but just that little bit extra will help improve the overall compliance with the LPA. If a major non-conformance is raised, you'll have 30 days to close that non-conformance. So with an observation, there's no action required, if I can say that. If a major non-conformance is raised, you have 30 days to close that car out. And then what I talked about earlier, the critical non-conformance. So if a critical non-conformance is raised at the time of the audit, that can include immediate suspension. So yes, if there is a critical non-conformance identified at the audit, the auditor would generally then contact the program manager and discuss the issue with the program manager over the phone to confirm whether or not it is a critical. And that critical then can be downgraded again further, or it will remain as a critical, dependent on the review that then is done by Integrity Systems Company. So again, if a CAR or a non-conformance is raised as a result of the audit, the auditor will explain the steps on what is the non-conformance and what is the recommended action that needs to occur when that non-conformance has been identified, and where to send the evidence to close out that non-conformance. So that would lead me to the next slide there, please, Elizabeth.
No worries.
Yes.
Okay.
So how do you close out a CAR? What action do you need to take? So firstly, as I alluded to in the previous screen, the auditor should explain all this at the exit meeting or the closing meeting. So there has been a non-conformance raised. This is the issue, and this is going to be the recommended action. So when you receive the audit report, you could already have some strategies in place to deal with this before the audit report comes, okay? But when the audit report does come to you, have a good read of it, look at the non-conformances. What were they? What's the wording in the recommended action there? Do the recommended action, all right? You've got 30 days to close this CAR out. If I can just say, if there's an issue with closing that CAR out before that 30 days comes around, please contact LPA admin to request an extension of time if that's what you need. All right. So once you've taken the action, provide a copy of that evidence to the LPA admin to demonstrate that the CAR has been closed. The admin will review that documentation or whatever it is that you provide. They'll assess it. They'll close the non-conformance. They may have to come back to you with some further information if that's necessary, but most of the times they'll close it, and you'll receive a notification from the LPA admin to say that the objective evidence has been accepted and the CARs are now being closed. Okay, so for example, if you have a CAR raised and you don't have it because you didn't have a biosecurity plan, so the recommended action there would be to document your on-farm biosecurity plan and then provide a copy of that to the LPA admin, who will then, as I say, review that and close the CAR out for you.
Yes, and if you ever need any help, we're always here to help understand those and what you need to do as well. So and not to be a Debbie Downer, but if you don't close a corrective action after the due date, that's where we, as in IC, will be contacting you and making some gentle reminders at first, and then we have to, under the program, look to suspend accreditation until you address those corrective actions, because you haven't proved that you're meeting the program requirements. If suspensions aren't addressed in the time frame given, then we move to withdraw accreditation, and that is trickier to come back from because you have to pay to come back and you have to recomplete accreditation. It's basically like starting again on top of having to close the CARs out. So it's better to pay attention to those reminders and get in early to get them done so they're off your plate. If you are suspended or withdrawn, you can't access LPA NVDs. So even if you tried to send to the sale yard or to abattoirs, they can check your PIC status on the NLAS database, and generally they'll flag it and say, we don't want the animals, they're not LPA from an LPA accredited person. So it's really important because it can limit your selling options. We don't like doing it, but if we do, if we need to. And again, if you need help around closing your corrective actions out, ask. If you need some more time, it's better to communicate that to us so we're aware of it than ignore us and have us chasing you down as well. But that's not a great point to end on in terms of what can happen if you ignore us, but ideally, and most people do the right thing there, so it's a good just to keep in contact and let us know if you need more time, I think is the takeaway there. So yeah, we do have records that you can upload to your LPA account, which helps with audit preparation. It helps with storing stuff in the right place. If you use electronic national vendor declarations, it's also great because you don't have to keep digging for your NVDs. You can just log on and show them, and the auditors can see them as well. So digital record keeping really helps in that regard if that is you're so inclined. We do have an online tool for the property risk assessment, for the biosecurity plan, and for the animal welfare management plan. So that's all gets created in your account. You can go in and update it at any time as well. So it is pretty cool if you like to go in and have a play around. But that brings us to the end of the audit portion of the evening. So thank you, Trish, for all your insights and hard work around auditing. We really appreciate it. And now you're just left with me to talk through some of the voluntary modules that we've got in the LPA program. And if you log into your LPA account, you can access these through the program section. So the first one we talk about is the harvested rangeland goats. So maybe not applicable, but we do have roughly 1,600 producers in Australia now who capture kind of these wild goats from the rangelands and send them through to processing. So this is an approval pathway that was put in place to support sheep and goat EID implementation that will be mandatory from the 1st of January. So this is an approval pathway that's got lots of audits and approval kind of processes around it to make sure we know where these goats are coming from and have a really strong control over them. So 95% of the goat meat we export in Australia is exported, so it's a vast majority of these goats are going overseas, and making sure we can understand where they're coming from and control that movement pathway is really important. It is necessary to become HRG accredited or add this onto an LPA accreditation to access this pathway. So if you do catch these goats, you need to do the accreditation in that module to get access to a new NPD and be able to move those goats without applying an NLAS device. So roughly they're either going from capture straight to slaughter or via one depot, which is 10 days in totality. So very tight time frame. Harvested rangeland goats, like I said, they're captured from a wild state, can't be managed, can't be bred, no husbandry procedures on them. So any of that happens, they have to be tagged and they're treated as a managed goat. They can only move, like I said, to an abattoir straight for slaughter or to one depot, and then the depots have 10 days to get them to slaughter or tag them. So it's really important and really tight. So we do lots of audits on these goat producers to make sure that we're capturing those risks and making sure the right NPDs are being used. So participation in this module requires state government approval as well. So we manage that through the LPA process. And you have to have an audit every 2 years. So that's actually a higher level of scrutiny as well over the top of it to make sure we're doing the right thing. We do have 2 versions of the goat NVD now, so one for harvested rangeland goats and one for regular goats, which are identified with tags. So if you do have goats and you haven't bought a new goat NVD book, be sure to make sure you've got the right version, or use eNVDs because it's always the right version. Okay, so now on to the European Union Deforestation Regulation, which is a bit of a mouthful, or we call it the EUDR for short. And this applies if you are a cattle or a beef producer. So the EUDR is a specific requirement that applies to beef and leather and hide products that will enter into the European Union from 31st of December this year. So the European Union has a commitment to sourcing products that don't contribute to deforestation or forest degradation. And so they put this rule in place to kind of make sure that what they're putting on the market for sale is meeting those requirements. This impacts us because we do export about $150 million worth of beef and $50 million worth of leather to the EU every year. And it falls outside of the remit of the European Union Cattle Accreditation Scheme, or UCAS, which is managed by DAF. And that has to do with the food safety status and the hormone-free status of beef. So in order to help both producers and exporters meet this requirement, we had to put in some tools to enable to get that market access or continue that market access, which is around having producers share their property's geolocation through a really simple mapping tool in their LPA account. And part of that is we can then attach that geolocation to every tag that's been on your property through to the NLAS, which is important because those exporters need the geolocations to then check for deforestation and then be able to export those products. So if you're EU accredited for, cattle production, it's important that you share that geolocation so that you can continue to access that market. There's no kind of getting around it. And if you're not, it's still important to consider sharing as well, because leather can come from any animal or any cattle in Australia effectively outside of the EU program, and leather's going to be impacted quite severely as well. So it's all secure. Your data's not going to be made publicly available. It is a single latitude longitude, but it is an important one for EU producers of cattle and also for the leather industry as well. This is just a screen grab of the mapping tool. And so when you log on and you want to share, you just pinpoint on your map where your property is located, and that permissions the sharing. You can cancel the sharing if you don't want to participate, but it is required for those exports from the 31st of December, which will get hot and heavy. So if you are in the EU program, make sure you've got that sharing going, so your processes and things aren't held up and your beef gets through the border. And lastly, we're just talking quickly about dairy QA in the LPA program. So dairy QA, if you have dairy cattle, it doesn't apply to sheep or goat dairies at this stage, is around recognising the quality assurance audits that dairy producers go under with their processors or their state government. So we give, if you have just a fully dairy herd, we provide free LPA accreditation. If you just have your cows and your bobby calves, and you get exempt from random LPA audits. So random selection, you just get excluded from, but we can still target if there are NLAS issues. To opt in is quite simple. You need a dairy license number from your state government, and basically let us know if you're trading in beef cattle or sheep or goats, and then agree to the declaration, which is, if we ask, provide information about your processes as well. So it's a good tool to have if you have a dairy as well, but it's a quick and simple process, and it gives you a little benefit. But ending the night, I guess, before I hand back to Jack, is around the top 3 takeaways I would like to share and remind you all of is, if you do get picked for an audit, you have to have one. So regardless of your property size or the number of livestock you have, if you're party to the program, you have to follow the program requirements. So if you sell one animal into the export supply chain, it has to meet the requirements. So it's important to do that. If you're a hobby farmer, or you have livestock as pets, or you just have them for your own consumption, maybe reconsider needing LPA accreditation if you're not willing to, have the audits. Also keeping your records. So we talked a lot about keeping good records for your NVD completion, and it is a risk mitigation for yourselves as well. So if you've got the records and something goes wrong, you've got that to back up and say, it wasn't me, I did the right thing. And lastly, audits are all about helping you and helping educate and improve, as well as fortifying and showing that verification to our overseas trading partners that we have good systems and our product is world class. So they're the 3 takeaways for tonight. Hopefully you've got your questions into the Q&A box, but if not, we'll be online for just a little bit more as Jack wraps up. So Jack, back to you. Thank you. Oh, sorry, just we do have lots of resources. I think I talked about all of them tonight, or lots of them tonight, but they're on our website, and we'll send out links and things with the webinar recording as well. So yeah, there's lots there. And if you ever need help, we're always here to do that too. So Jack, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Trish. That was a terrific presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed that. The LPA is continuing to evolve to support producers and ensure ongoing market access for Australian red meat. And we will continue to do new things there. One example over the next 6 months is you're going to see the inclusion of hormone-free assurance for exported beef to meet foreign rules and regulations. This is going to allow Aussie beef greater access to valuable overseas markets. So that's something that you'll be hearing more about in the future. But for now, that's the end of this webinar series, but on LPA, but it's not the end of webinars for this season. Next week, we're going to jump in with a series of 2 webinars based around traceability, starting with sheep and goat EID next Thursday, the 30th of April, followed by one on PIC reconciliations on Wednesday, the 6th of March. And further down the track from that, we'll be looking in May at creating and sharing ENVDs. And we'll be putting one on to close out the season of hobby farmers and new producers. Something to look forward to. So I encourage all of you to register for those. The QR codes are there, and sorry about that. I was a bit slow on the uptake. The QR code's just there if you may want to grab a shot of that now, and you can jump in and join them, register for them afterwards. And can I also recommend everyone complete our survey? This really helps us to design these webinars in line with what you need. So your feedback tells us not only how we're doing, but what you want to see in the future. It's a great resource. It really helps us help put on these as to the best of our ability. Now, don't forget that if you need any help, to please contact the ISC customer helpline at any time if you have questions. They're there to answer them. And we will, as I mentioned at the start, be sending out a post-webinar email. Excuse me, a post-webinar email that's going to contain a link to the video, answer to all of the questions, the ones that were asked beforehand, the ones that you asked during this webinar, and if there's any that we couldn't get to, we will include them, and any other resources such as Elizabeth mentioned earlier. So with that, that's the end of this evening. Thank you all for attending. Thank you especially to Elizabeth and Trish for putting on such an informative webinar. In the background, thanks again to Natasha, Xander, and Kaylin for answering your questions and all the help that they did in putting this all together. And on behalf of the team, I'd like to wish you all the very best and hope to see you soon at the next webinars. Enjoy your evening.